Very, very good, Jeff. Thank you so much. Jeff, I'd like to personally thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. This is definitely a world stage. The Beyond BIM Symposium has a multinational global reach, which is fantastic. It's amazing what your company has been able to put together, and I was very honored to be there back in 2019 with you and all of our friends there in London. The events have been spectacular. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm grateful for that. I People who know me, I want to just say one thing about my professional past. I began my career working for Royal Caribbean Cruise Line almost exactly 21 years ago, which is it doesn't even fit in my mind that 21 years have gone by. When I went right out of college, I went straight to work for Royal Caribbean Cruise Line, which was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And one of the reasons why I was so grateful to work for Royal Caribbean, despite all the free travel and all the good food and all the beautiful people who work there, they were using CATIA to construct some of the cruise ships. Not all of them, but specifically the ones that were built by the shipyard Meyer Werth were all built in CATIA, and they were fantastic. So I got a very early glimpse of what the future of the building industry could look like 21 years ago. So by that, what do I mean? Well, we were virtually constructing the cruise ships. We were modeling them to full detail, down to the wire ties. Um, when you think about a building, you're not just thinking about, when you think about cruise ship, you're not just thinking about a building, you're thinking about a vessel that's floating out in the ocean. And it's basically a floating city. So it's vastly much more complicated to design and engineer for a cruise ship than it is for a building. Because a building doesn't have all the lateral loads, all the forces that are constantly acting on it, and all the movements and all your, erosions and all the systems. Because remember, when you are building, you're building in the city, and you have the city as an infrastructure that supports the building. When you're a cruise ship, you are literally a floating city. So everything that you need to support life in a city, you need to cram it into a ship. So if anybody wants to become a super architect, I recommend you go design a cruise ship because you're going to learn more about so many things you can't even imagine in that cruise ship, from jails to food supply to distribution to power process and petroleum to energy to water desal plants. I mean, it's moving and it's navigating, and you have all kinds of structure. You have governance inside the ship. There's power structures in there. There's all kinds of things going on. And you have entertainment. You have food. You have a floating hotel. You have a floating casino. You have security issues. It's a floating city. So when I worked for a Royal Caribbean, we were again designing, engineering, constructing, simulating, fabricating all of the digital model that was 20 years ago. And I remember having one thought that probably changed my life and began the quest that I'm still actively involved now, which was if we did what Royal Caribbean was doing and my work was doing with cruise ships 20 years ago in the building industry, it would completely revolutionize the building industry. And I didn't know all the factors that were keeping the building industry away from being able to do that. And you can almost give me a PhD on this topic because I've spent the last 20 years of my life answering that question. It's a big question to answer, but it did take me through a journey where I asked questions. Is it the cost of the building? Is it the hardware? Is it the software? Is it the people? Is it the culture? Is it the legal system? Is it because of 3D and we live in a 2D paradigm world? What is keeping the building industry from effectively doing exactly what I was doing for Royal Caribbean 20 years ago? That being said, let me share my experiences with you in the BIM paradigm. So I am going to volunteer a new definition of BIM. This is solely coming out of Phi Cubed. If anybody's offended, angry about this definition, disappointed in this definition, I take full responsibility for it. It's my definition, okay? And normally it's the kind of definition I tell my clients when we get sober about technology and information management inside their enterprise. So BIM, from a Phi Cubed perspective, is a front-end data collection strategy designed to automate the industry standard in 3D to sustain a 2D document production process. And if we go to this image, this is, again, I think Graphisoft is a wonderful company, so I am not bragging on Graphisoft. I think they're one of the better BIM companies in the marketplace. They do wonderful things with the interoperability. So please don't be offended that I've put this image out here. This image does kind of illustrate the point. It's kind of the idea that we're going to build a model and we're going to invent computers and we're going to invent softwares and we've invented powers and we're going to do all these things with technology and smartphone. And all we're going to do is land it back on paper, which is effectively what we were doing when we were drafting. So that's a lot of work and a lot of technology and a lot of human hours and a lot of human investment to essentially try to outperform a drafting person, slumped over a table. So I don't think we're using technology correctly. Yes, of course, we can generate drawings and we need to kind of go beyond BIM. So sometimes when I talk about this, I look at what we've done with BIM and I sometimes get a little disappointed because we could go so much further and there's so much more potential, but a lot of people have gotten comfortable and have settled in document automation. And most people haven't moved out of that paradigm and haven't really gone beyond it. So again, let me rewind. Royal Caribbean, 20 years ago, we were modeling a cruise ship and that cruise ship was being built in a factory, being assembled in components, being driven, numerically controlled, all the welding. If you ever have the opportunity to be on a cruise ship, look at the numerically controlled welding on the bottom of the ship. They're done by robotics, okay? Boy, we really fell short because essentially we don't really need drawings. We can go straight from the desktop, straight into the manufacturing or fabrication process. We're talking about industrialized construction in the building industry. I'm talking about industrialized construction in the shipbuilding industry 20 years ago. So I think the building industry has a lot to catch up. And again, that for us is good because that means there's a lot of opportunities for us. So I'm going to touch on a couple different topics and my format is going to be in the format of a question. So in this category, we're talking about, again, if you're in the world of BIM or if you're an owner, if you're a contractor or even an architect, you're in the building industry space, you probably have heard this term, a federated model. And I like to pose that, and remember, I'm speaking from a Phi Cubed perspective. I'm coming to you from the trenches. I'm coming to you from the war room, okay? A federated model versus a single source of truth. At one point in the history of BIM, we were talking about building a model, one version of the truth, okay? And then people got upset with this concept and said, no. We're not building one model. We're building a federation of models. And this federation of models are going to be mashed up together. Don't worry about if we duplicated effort. Don't worry about if that column that the architect designed is duplicated by the structural engineer. Don't worry about the fact that we have a lot of assets that are shared with other people, so they have to duplicate it. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the fact that we have multiple versions of the truth in the model. The contractor will sort it out. So imagine for a moment you have a project and you have two columns. And I always tell this to my students. You have a column from the architect and you have a column from the structural engineer. If you're a contractor, which column do you build? And they should be the same column. But what if they're not the same column? What if the architect moved his column and the structural engineer didn't find out? You have two versions of the truth. In my world, I don't like the situation. We need a better business model where a model between the architect and the structural engineer is a shared asset, and their intellectual property and their application is being managed by the technology. So if I want to design a column for my purposes, whatever those happen to be, and the structural engineer wants to take my model and further develop it for the purpose of engineering, we should be basically talking about the same asset. When we end up with two versions of the truth, I know that we're going in a wrong direction, and that's mostly because the industry lacks the IT infrastructure to manage something that we call intellectual property. So when you're in a situation where you're co-authoring, you do need an infrastructure that is largely missing in BIM that allows to manage the relationships of who's making what contributions and who is the owner of that intellectual property. In the advanced world of aerospace and defense and automotive and other industries, these issues have been largely resolved. It's the building industry that hasn't resolved these issues. Don't think for a moment that these issues are plaguing other industries exactly the same way they're plaguing our industry. They're not. These are industries that have already resolved this over the last 30 years, which also is good news for us. So let me start with this particular question here. Is it possible to develop a building project in one platform? And that may bring up all kinds of strange feelings and emotions. I ask you for a second, reserve that emotion for the moment. Think about, hold on to that feeling, whatever that feeling is. You can put it into a question, and I'll be happy to address it. I didn't say application. Please notice the word, because words matter, and people, they take words and they do terrible things with them. The word I'm using here is platform. And I want to make a distinction between application and platform. Okay, can you develop a building in one integrated platform? It's a very different conversation than a common application. So I just want to make that distinction for the moment. Software here. I'm not particularly picking on any one particular company. I think I know everybody in every single one of these companies. At some one point, I've sat down and I've talked to them. Okay, so if owners really understood what the BIM process looks like, I don't know if you know this, the worst job in BIM is called the BIM manager. If you're a BIM manager, you know who you are and you know what I'm talking about. Why is it a terrible job? First of all, nobody appreciates you. Second of all, you have multiple versions of the truth all over the place, being authored by all kinds of people in all different stages of development. And generally speaking, they're not being managed in any one infrastructure. They're being managed in silos. You can't control what they're doing, and then it's very hard to see what changed. And I hate that some people may be surprised. Do you know that there's no, most BIM softwares don't have any kind of version tracking capability, even out of the box? Most software are lacking version and revision tracking capabilities. And even the ones that do it a little bit don't go down to the component level. They kind of like treat the model as like this one big clump that changed, when maybe the only thing that changed was a door or a window. And it considers that to be a complete entire change. Not to mention that, never mind about the individual internal components of the model, you can forget about that. That's not being managed at all. So I sometimes refer to this as the BIM chaos model, okay? Because this is what's happening on projects when people are developing BIMs and information is moving all over the place, and nobody anywhere in the enterprise can give you an honest answer of what the current state of the BIM or even the project is, because all the parts are moving and you don't have visibility across the board. I think we can do better. All right, so if you've been in the BIM world any amount of time, these images are not that popular anymore but I think they're very important for us to understand at this moment. So I just went to the internet and I grabbed a couple of these images. These images are talking about the different phases of design. So you have design, you have planning, you have design, you have build, you have operate. Those are basically the main categories. Okay. But even within the window of design, you have handoffs. So each one of these phases, each of them are their own micro handoffs. So this image gives you the impression that design is happily moving along, and then it gets to basically procurement. That's not true. That design process is falling apart all the way through, dealing with interior designers, dealing with engineers, MEP engineers, exchanging the models. And my experience has been that it's never been coordinated. So the architect maybe, and I say maybe very loosely, maybe sends out his model, if he has one, sends out his model or his drawings to the subconsultants, consider that a handoff. They then come up with a solution. They don't cross coordinate. And then we get to something we call construction, or it gets sent out to bid, and that goes through the kind of the procurement process. And a lot of people, they don't really trust their BIM. So when they get to the end of construction, sometimes they don't really want to give you the BIM because their BIM was used for automating the drawing production process, if anything at all. Okay, maybe some renderings, maybe some animations, but it was basically to generate the documentation. Deep down inside, they know that the model may not be fit for construction. So the use case here really comes into question. So you get this handoff, and then the people who receive it, they kind of have to do all this rework and duplication of effort to prepare the information they've received in order to get it ready for tender and for procurement. And then it gets worse because at some point a contractor is going to get selected who was not involved in anything that happened, generally speaking. They're going to receive this data. That data is going to be again exchanged and not appropriate for construction because now we are in a different phase. I like to think of the construction process as a continuous design process, but not everybody sees it this way. But we get to construction. Sometimes a building is fully developed, very unlikely. Most of the time it's somewhere between 30 and 70%. And in order to bring the building to construction and to, let's call it an integrated project that can be built, ultimately the building has to be integrated, otherwise it won't function at the end. So there's a lot of unresolved issues that there's a lot of planning that continues to happen during the construction process. So the BIM is not really done. Other BIMs get built, BIMs that have to do with manufacturing, fabrication, engineering, and assembly. Installation, these sort of things, they need more development, right? So different people are going to build different BIMs for their purposes, depending who they are. They may build a BIM or a digital twin for manufacturing and fabrication and simulation and optimization, all kinds of other reasons that they can't use the BIM that was created in the front end of this process. So some people will call it, I will call it, a throwaway BIM situation. So you receive a model and say, okay, that's nice. That's what you want to do. Okay, great, we're not doing that. And you go and you build another model. So now you have multiple versions of the truth going through this entire process. And then we get to another phase here. Let me move the slide here. All right. All right, so I'm gonna pick on this. I'm gonna pick on this one slide image because I think it's actually really good. There's a lot of terrible ones, but I don't think this one's that bad. I think this one's a little bit more honest about what's actually happening. So in this little gray area that you see here, we have the theoretical BIM process with good interoperability. Now, my friends of Dassault, I would say they've built a platform that has as close to zero interoperability problems as money can buy. So if you're not in that space, if you're using CATIA, you know what I'm talking about. If you are in any other platform and you now have to work with somebody else, you know what that feels like, right? All of a sudden, their model is not going to work. all your parametrics you did are gone. You're going to lose data. God forbid if something gets lost or truncated or gobbled up in the exchange process, you're going to basically have to do rework. Right? Now, when BIM was sort of presented, again, it was talking about these different phases and how you had these handoffs at these different moments. And the shaded area is basically the value that could basically be generated from the BIM. So this particular image is very promising. It gives you a good warm and fuzzy feeling, and yeah, we want that. No, we still have the handoffs. You still got the design phase, the procurement, the build, the manage. And this slide's a little bit more honest because it's saying that when you get to the handoff, you're going to have a little dip. Maybe not a huge dip, but you're going to have a little dip. And that little dip, you're going to have some data loss, but you're not, compared to what you used to have, it's kind of a welcome thing, right? Yeah, okay, we'll have a little dip, but we'll be able to move along. Okay. So this line gives you an impression of something I like to describe here. A progression. Unless you model buildings, unless you are very familiar with the modeling process and technology and working in a multidisciplinary process and working through design and phases, that progression, what this image implies, doesn't happen with BIM. I can tell you, knowing a tool like CATIA, when I began with CATIA, the industry was the lower curve with all the choppiness. And in my imagination, in my mind's eye, I thought to myself, well, if we do CATIA, we're going to have a progression. And yeah, I know that like I have this beautiful, wonderful insight. And the only thing that has to happen now is the rest of the world has to find out about it. So I'm just going to tell everybody this wonderful thing I discovered. And of course, how can you hide the sun? Eventually they'll figure it out that, you know, you can do a progression in CATIA and you can start in the design phase and go all the way through end to end. Yeah, it didn't really happen that way. Okay, so here's the little drops I was talking about. Okay, let me move this along. So in the zero versus a progression, okay, is it possible to build a digital twin as a progression? And by the way, if I'm leaving some questions out, it's because I want to answer them a little bit later. Is it possible to build a digital twin as a progression? I like to think so. And I know some people would love to take me out and beat me up and kick me around and bite my ear off. It's not going to happen because this is my model. Okay. On the left side, you have a, let's call it a design intent model if it makes anybody feel good. Okay. Which may be okay for early planning process and, you know, space reservations and fit and form and making sure that you have things accounted for in your spaces, right? But as a progression, this is what we're leaving in the table, and it drives me nuts, okay? Because I know that is what, so the problem is once you know, you can unknow. And that might be a blessing or a curse. I haven't really figured it out yet, but knowing, boy, you just cannot know when you know, and it hurts when they try to make you go back in another direction that's less than what you know, or how about even stupid. It's a problem. Okay, so how do we get here? There's probably a million questions that people have about how you get here. So I'm not necessarily implying that the architect has to model to detail, you know, an engine and a radiator and a turbo, okay? I'm not suggesting that has to happen. I am suggesting that the architect can capture the design intent model and can capture this model, and the manufacturer, the fabricator, who then is actually going to build the as designed, as engineered, as manufactured, as fabricated, as installed version of this asset, can exchange this asset with the owner and the team and it can become part of the living model that then becomes part of the larger system that the owner inherits at the end of his $400 million project. Okay, so I really do believe that can happen, and I want my clients and everyone that I do business with to arrive at this level, and there's no reason you can't have it. Okay, so back here we are. All right, is it possible to build a digital twin as a progression? Well, a few things have to happen here. One, data and knowledge increases over time. So that's that top of the curve, right? You need a seamless exchange at the faces, right? You also need a situation where no data, low or no data loss happens. And you need to begin to eliminate this handoff, right? We need to get rid of the handoff. The handoff is there for many reasons. Some of those are there for liability reasons. Again, 19th century stuff. We're in the 21st century where you don't, when you deposit a check to your bank, you could just take your smartphone, take a picture of it, and the money goes to your bank, and no check was ever deposited physically to the bank. So in the 21st century reality, yes, we can definitely eliminate the handoffs, and yes, we can definitely work in a more integrated way. So this is really important here. So potential value of the data that is being captured is that gray area. We're going to talk about the little gray area a little bit more, a little bit downstream here. So again, as I mentioned, this implies a progression. Now, this red line that I'm pointing to here, where I say, why is the data loss so severe at the end of the construction? Well, one reason is because most of the work that we've seen done in BIM is a race to get the building built. And once the building's been built and the contractor's been paid, how do I say this nicely? They kind of forget to not give you the information, and then you have to hunt down the contractor and everyone who was involved in the project and try to cram out of them any documentation you can about the as-built condition of the project. So yeah, there are some handoffs, but some owners even have to hold some money hostage and say, hey, we'll give you your final $200,000 once you give us our handoff. And if you don't give us a handoff, we don't give you your money. And that kind of incentivizes the contractor. I think we can do better. So the gray shaded here implies an integrated platform capturing data. So let me mention something. One of the reasons that this big drop at the end of construction happens is because there's not a platform capturing the data. So for example, with some of my clients right now, we're eliminating the handoff. So I'm telling my customer that throughout the entire building life cycle, they will arrive at the end of construction and there's going to be a zero handoff. And the reason why is because they have been actively capturing all the data, the BIM, the specs, the sheets, the construction drawings, the shutdown procedures, the COBE data, everything that you want in your BIM, everything that you want in the owner's information requirements is being systematically captured throughout the entire life cycle. And that little gray area is the data that's being captured during the entire design construction life cycle. So for the progression to be true, okay, and I'm not in the world of fantasies. I'm in the world of outcomes and real deliverables, okay? A few small things have to happen. One, you need a platform with a near zero interoperability problem. If you have a big interoperability problem, it's not gonna happen. You need to choose an authoring application that can go across the building lifecycle, and more importantly, allows you the ability to co-author with other people, because other people need to make contributions. You need to reduce you need to reduce or eliminate the handoff. Now, if for some reason, let's say that you have to do a handoff because you have legal requirements that you need to safeguard, your attorneys are telling you you need to shield yourself, you need to timestamp something. In the case of something like a TIA, you can generate what's called a 3D XML with authoring, by the way, which will allow you to say, this is what I did. I took the baton from point A to point B, and at point B, I generated a 3D XML, but I gave it to you, and you don't have to start over. You can take everything I did up to that point. I'm transferring the intellectual property to you. You can capture this, and now you can just start from that point and take it where you need to take it to. So I think that's something our industry currently doesn't understand yet. No one's really told them. So if I have to be the first guy, let it be me. So this can happen. So I do believe that you can eliminate the handoff. And again, if you have a platform that's capturing data through the life cycle, this big data drop that happens at the end of construction goes away. And when we get into that operate manage, this little window here, who looks like it's like 2 or 3 years, is more like a 30, 40, 50 year little window, which you're constantly capturing data about the history of operations, the performance, and all kinds of other things, where the data keeps, the platform keeps capturing data about the operational history of the asset. Okay. So what would such a platform look like? So this is a snapshot of what we're showing our clients at this point. Here you can see a BIM model or a digital twin living on the 3D Experience platform. You can see that we have different things happening. We can see the product tree. We can see something called Enoyo Rational Explorer, which shows you all the different assets that are connected to your model or your digital twin. Because again, it's not just about the model, it's not just about the data that's in the model, it's about all the documentation, the websites, the engineering documents, the simulations, the schedules. It's all the assets that are connected to your asset. It doesn't live in a vacuum. So we're now entering the world of platforms. So yes, a platform can allow you to manage the data as a progression for the building lifecycle. Fragmented project delivery, which is the standard, versus an integrated project delivery. Now, IPD, as some people call it, there's been a lot of conversation about this, a lot. I've listened to everything they had to say about it. Do you really need special contracts or special structures, business models? You need something, okay? You do need something, but it is possible to deliver a building project in an integrated way. The standard is fragmented, okay? If you were to consider such a thing, two things have to happen for the IPD to be there. One, you truly need a business model that is going to benefit from it, delivering buildings in an integrated way. If you don't understand the business reasons for why you want to deliver buildings in an integrated way, why you want to integrate your team, why you want to manage your information, well, your road's going to be a little bit longer to get to the kind of performances that I'm describing here. And you also need a technology infrastructure. So you need integrated process. So when we talk about integration, you always say, hey, you can't, if you're going to talk about integration, you can't forget the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps, from Phi Cube's perspective, is people, project, and process. Because you can't get to an integrated building by, so a lot of people, they do a beeline to the project. They're mostly thinking about the project and the technology that's going to deliver that project in an integrated way. Kind of assuming that if they had the technology, it would just magically happen. No, there's a business practice that people need to learn how to work together. They need to learn how to collaborate. They need to learn how to share information. They need to work in an integrated environment. If they've been 40 years working in a silo and now they're working with a model that's globally changing in real time, so they have some things they basically need to do. So integrating people, integrated project, and integrated process. On the top section here, you can see this is a Dassault system slide. you can see what happens when you have these different silo processes and you have these different broken processes in the BIM process. In the lower image, you have a more integrated process where information is flowing through the different contributors throughout the entire design construction lifecycle. Nick, do I have a minute or two?
You got a second.
Okay, right. So when you're looking at this this integrated project delivery possibility, to deliver an integrated way, you need to accomplish a couple things. You need a common platform across the entire project delivery process. You need a multidisciplinary application that can support co-authoring and knowledge sharing and IP management. You need an open standard to capture data from siloed BIM applications. Okay. We're approaching the end of my presentation. Sometimes people ask, what's the difference between a BIM, which is a representation, and a digital twin? I would say a BIM is a system of communication. It's the idea of the building object and not the building object itself. It's a shorthand graphical representation that conveys ideas of limited information, right? And the models typically have the data that AC object pretty much captures. They have some sense of space planning dimensions. They have some connection information, and they have some basic performance data and quantities by unit. When you look at a digital twin, you're really talking about, as I mentioned before, as designed, as fabricated, as installed, as built, and as operated. You're really talking about, when you think about uses, the short answer is you can use it for everything. And what is it? What's everything? Designing, engineering, construction, manufacturing, simulation, and then you can then take it further. You could take it into facilities management because the whole history of the asset is there. And then you can go one step further into IoT. Okay, so you can then connect the physical asset to the digital twin, so you have an information exchange going back and forth between your virtual model and what's happening on the field. Okay, so there's really, I like to think of as a digital twin as the equivalent in all forms to the physical asset, not a representation, kind of like the ghost of the machine, the essence of the asset. Can we manage all project data through the entire building lifecycle? I'm gonna say yes. And right now, this is what it looks like for us, where we have the data on the platform, and you can pull up any asset of that data and how it's all interconnected with each other. I would say yes, you can eliminate the handoff and work in a more integrated way from end to end. So I think I mentioned this. So we do need, I like to see this gray area as the platform. I think it's time that we get to, platform. So we spent a lot of energy and talking a bit about the BIM, but we've kind of forgotten to give the BIM a home. And I think it's time that we get to the platform concept, where we have a platform that's capturing information from everybody in the entire building life cycle. Everyone has access to the same version of the truth. Everyone has access to the same data. And you have digital rights controlling who could do what with which piece of information. So I mentioned this issue. Again, I did mention this is the platform component. And the big loss, I would say, not only is the owner losing data there, if the owner doesn't have a platform that's managing and capturing all this data, they are experiencing outrageous amounts of data loss, waste, and rework inside their entire project delivery process. So guys, that's it for me.